Today I would like to talk about the book of Isaiah, and it's relevant to the time of Advent. But before, I would like to say maybe something about the context, a bit about the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah has been one of the great prophets, such as Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and he's one of the prophets from the time after the destruction of the temple from the exile, when the Hebrew are in exile and come back from the exile. And he's talking about a great news that is to come, a great prophet, someone who will save the world. But he does it in a very particular way. And that is what the Christian tradition has noticed, beginning with Saint Jerome, who is the translator of the Bible, the Vulgata. So all the Gregorian chants that the nuns are singing comes from the Vulgata, from Saint Jerome. And Saint Jerome wrote that Isaiah was so important that he was practically the fifth evangelist. And that actually he was the prophet who told us more about Christ and about this very special good news and prophet to come in a way that is very Christian, so to speak. So he's the one who's been identified with the coming of Christ the most. And of course, that is why he's so relevant to the time of Advent, before Christmas and before the child is born. What has been noticed is that Isaiah speaks not so much as a prophet, but as actually a bit like a historian. If everything had already happened and he was just recounting it. When you see puer natus est in Bethlehem, so the child has been born in Bethlehem. So it's as if he was telling a story that has already happened. And this is what the great commenters noticed. And of course, this is not only Saint Jerome. When Saint Augustine, who was more or less a contemporary, went to his bishop Ambrosius and asked him, "What can I read?" Ambrosius said, "Well, you should read Isaiah because he's the best foreteller of Christ and also the best foreteller of the conversion of the Gentiles, and so the people who would then become Christians." And it goes on with history. In the 13th century, you also have Hugues de Saint-Cher, who says same thing, and also in the Eastern tradition, Saint John Chrysostom says he's the prophet with the loudest voice. So very important prophet, and understood as such by the great commenters, by the great theologians, and by the people in the Middle Ages, because they used to play these mysteries in front of cathedrals to tell the people about the story, about the gospel in a theatrical way. And Isaiah was always a very important character. You had Adam and Eve, you had John the Baptist, of course, and you had Isaiah, the Jewish prophet who was able to identify Christ beforehand, so to speak. So to come back to the Advent time, if you look at the masses in Advent, you will see that the first Sunday of Advent, you don't see much of Isaiah. The second Sunday, you begin to see something. The third one, too, and the fourth Sunday of Advent is really where you have the most of Isaiah, and it goes on until Christmas Eve, Christmas night, Christmas Day, and the coming of the kings, with this very famous graduale omnes de Saba venient, Isaiah 60, they will all come from Saba to adore the child. So it's really going through, and it does accompany us in a very interesting way during these 4 weeks and even after. One of the very important and interesting things I think are these very powerful pictures. You will know in the fourth Sunday of Advent, for instance, the communion Ecce Virgo. It's a virgin will give birth to a child, something impossible, very powerful picture. But you also have it in another communion, Dicite Pusillamines, also in Advent. You will comfort the weak, and the desert will bloom. Yet another very powerful picture of a desert that is by definition unable to bear any fruit and that gives, flowers and everything possible. And in this same passage, Isaiah 35, you also have that the desert will give water, and that the blind will see, the deaf will hear. So all these impossible things will happen. And last but not least, in Isaiah and in these passages that were selected for Advent, there is this idea of light within darkness, and this is the picture. Christ is light within darkness, in the middle of darkness. You have this, for instance, when you have the people who was walking in darkness saw a great light, but it's not only there; it's everywhere. And I think these metaphors are very important to us as a theme for meditation. They tell us that, it's not only that they tell us that Christ is coming, a great prophet, and they tell us that it is something really beyond the reach of our mind. It is beyond our world, beyond our categories. We know that what we cannot think in terms of language, what we cannot say, we cannot think, and conversely. So it's beyond us, beyond our language, and it is a way of talking about God. Maybe the only way you can actually talk about God without being limited in a way. This is the poetic language, the metaphor. It goes beyond, and this is one of the reasons why you will see most of the mystics have spoken with words of poetry and powerful images. I'm thinking of John of the Cross and so many others who've been great poets and great lovers, and not theologians in the sense of listing a series of attributes or creating a powerful system that functions very well intellectually. But there is something that you have to say also. This is very good to think all the sacred history and to think about concepts and everything. But there is something that is beyond, and it will always remain so. And in a way, of course, if you were able to say precisely what God is, then there would be a problem, actually, because it would not be God anymore. A bit like when a lover is able to see exactly why he loves, then maybe you have a bit of doubt about his love. And there is a comparison here between this and our relationship to God, I think. So I think this is a very, these metaphors and powerful images, this contrast, are delivering a very powerful message. And this message has been, of course, it's not only in the book of Isaiah, and a lot of theologians have been in this flow, so to speak. You can think about Denis, the Areopagite in the 6th century. These people who were basically saying we can speak about God and say things that are not untrue, but in a way they are not true because they are not exactly this, and you cannot exactly say things. And this current was called or later identified as so-called negative theology, but it's not about negating theology. It's about saying, yes, there are things that cannot be expressed, and we can say many things that are not untrue, but that are not fully true as well. So I think this is for us like some sort of reminder that we can never say or understand everything, and that it's normal. It's basically the idea of God that generates this. And of course, in the present context, I think this is one of the best safeguards against any kind of extremism in the sense of believing you have everything, you know everything, and everyone who is not exactly knowing the same thing is absolutely and completely wrong, and it can go as far as you need to sort of exterminate them, and we know some people have had these views. And I think with these ideas and these metaphors, and knowing that we need a language that goes beyond the words, and that our knowledge is finished and our concepts and our language are finished, I think we are and I mean, this would be impossible to take such a stance. And this is a position that is important, I think, and that is not only in Christianism, but in other spiritualities as well. It seems it's a bit like an underlying truth somewhere, that a lot of spiritual people have been able to identify that God was beyond words, and that something would always be far from us, and at the same time close to us. That's the meaning of Advent, that's the meaning of Incarnation, and that's the meaning of Christmas.